Shakespeare. He's a sociologist and received his PhD in political science at King's College, Cambridge. Throughout his career, he has published widely in the field of disability rights, including Disability Rights and Wrongs in 2006 and Arguing About Disability in 2009. He also publishes in the field of genetics and bioethics and has worked for the World Health Organization in Geneva. Dr. Shakespeare currently serves as a senior lecturer in the medical faculty at the University of East Anglia. We very much look forward to hear your presentation, Removing Barriers, Meeting Needs, the role of the CRPD. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great honour and pleasure to be back in Norway. I first came to Norway in 2002. Since then I've been back many times, visited places Tromsø and Trondheim and Buda and Bergen and Oslo. Have many friends here and great respect and affection for the country of Norway and the people of Norway. So, I don't think you need to be reminded of the difficulties that disabled people face in every society of the world, even Norway, with your great prosperity and social inclusion in so many dimensions. Even in Norway, disabled people are still left behind. We heard from the State Secretary, half are unemployed, people have poor health care, they're less likely to have relationships, they're set aside, they're disproportionately experiencing violence. Last year we published 2 papers showing people with disabilities have a 50% higher chance of having suffered violence in the last year, rising to 4 times higher if they had mental health problems. Children with disabilities are 3 times as likely to experience violence and abuse. So there's a huge amount of evidence from every country, in almost every domain, that disabled people have been left behind, have been excluded, have been treated badly. This seems extraordinary. We believe that we are kind and inclusive, but in practice, we are not. And that's why the CRPD issues us with a huge challenge. Michael eloquently, patiently, and in detail outlined the convention. I don't want to repeat what he has to say, but this first purpose is what should be before our minds. Full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to promote respect for dignity. And when we're thinking about disability and disabled people, I think we need to have as broad a conception as possible. 2 days ago, we marked World AIDS Day. Many people who live with HIV are also disabled people. We know that we live in aging societies. We are living longer, but we also have increased frailty in old age. Those are disabled people. We will become disabled people. And we also know, even in Norway, people are becoming heavier, taking less exercise, having problems with heart disease and diabetes, CRPD. The rise in chronic diseases generates more people with disabilities. So I want us to think very broadly about all the people who come within the disability umbrella. And in that second phrase in the article, I want to highlight one phrase: in interaction with. Because in the past, we've had what to me is a sterile debate about the medical versus the social. Remember, I was introduced, I work in a medical faculty. I teach doctors. And as I'll say later, the health needs of people with disabilities are also important. I think it's the interaction of the intrinsic impairment with the environment that creates either the problem or the solution. So we can go beyond medical and social to think about interactions. Now, as Michael outlined, the disabled people's movement, which shaped so powerfully the CRPD, have rejected the idea of charity, have articulated the need for rights, and have done so on the basis of this social model, the idea that people are disabled by society, not by their bodies. And as Michael outlined, this is tremendously liberating for disabled people. It relocates the problem away from the individual whose mind or body doesn't function so well, to the society which has denied them choices, discriminated against them in employment, segregated them in education. People realize that it's not their fault, it's society's fault, and therefore they feel empowered. But I think that there's a cost to this overemphasis on barriers when it suggests that disabled people are exactly the same as everybody else. Remove the barriers and we can compete on a level playing field. I think there's a danger if we think that disability is just the same as gender and ethnicity and religion and sexuality and these other differences. Because it suggests that all we need to do, and this is a big task, we know, but what we must do is to remove the prejudice, remove the discrimination, and then everybody will be equal. And I think that that's a dangerous assumption. The implication that if only we change policy and practice, we treat people equally, then everything will be fair and there will be no problems. Because I want to say that disability is more complicated than gender, race and sexuality. And I want to remind you of what came from Norway, from the Nordic countries, the relational model, stressing the interaction. And I think that we need, just as we do with the Nordic relational model and with the International Classification of Functioning, the ICF, I think we need to understand the contribution of different factors in the lives of disabled people. We have people's health situation. We have their psychological, emotional experiences, outlook. We have the physical environment, the provision or otherwise of ramps, elevators, tactile paving, information in different formats, sign language interpreters. We have social and cultural factors. We have the assumptions that we make about different groups of people, the fears that we have about different groups of people, the prejudices we have about different groups of people. And then we have the economic and the legal and the political factors. I want us to understand disability on different levels. And difficulties can come at any level, and we need to understand where it is most appropriate to intervene to solve the problem of disability. In my country, when a child with deafness is born, often we give a cochlear implant, a medical solution to that problem. Here in Norway, when a child with deafness is born, you teach the parents sign language. Do you see what I mean? The same issue resolved in a different, and I hope, more appropriate way. So we can intervene at different levels, and I think that impairment is a limiting factor for many people. Not for all disabled people, but for many disabled people, their physical or mental limitations are part of the problem. And if we don't address that, we cannot enable them to lead good, full, high-quality lives. So, and this is my personal interpretation. This is not the orthodox interpretation of the CRPD. So bear with me, and I'll explain why I think it's important for us to remember this. Because what we're all here about is what is the best way to achieve the human rights of disabled people. What is the best way to ensure the flourishing of disabled people? That's what we want to build, a society where nobody is left behind. Now, human rights lawyers have thought and wrote at length about human rights, and I'm not a human rights lawyer. I'm a sociologist. I'm interested in the consequences of human rights. But I think there are distinctions that folks have made between the legal and political rights on the one hand, like voting and the rule of law, And the economic, social, and cultural rights, on the other hand, like school, health, employment. Yeah? So that's one set of distinctions. And what's interesting about the CRPD, as Michael said, is that it combines both. It straddles both the freedom, the ability to vote, which many disabled people don't have, but the right to go to school, which many disabled people don't have. It bridges the two. But I think that there's an important distinction between what you might call liberty rights and claim rights. There are certain sort of rights which are, if you like, get off my back rights. Let me get on with it rights. Don't stop me from doing this rights. Let me vote. Let me get married if I wish to. Let me understand information. Let me get into your building. Stop stopping me rights. Yeah? That's very clear. Get off my back rights. And so let's look at some of those. So when we remove barriers, we create a level playing field. So we stop people treating folks unfairly. We say to the employer, you cannot say that just because this person is disabled, I'm not going to give them an interview. We say to the head teacher, you cannot say, I will refuse to teach disabled people in my school. You remove those unfair discriminations where people are saying, we're not going to create information in the right formats or whatever. And when you remove those barriers, folk flourish. Folk can participate. They can compete. They can do what they always would have been able to do. You can build a society which has got, hopefully, accessible transport. You can build schools which are level and have bathrooms which disabled people can use. You can construct an empowering world free of barriers. So that will help many, many people. And I think that Norway has gone far in this, but has farther to go. Transport, for example. I think we can strengthen rights of access to transport. Disabled people should be able to go where everybody else goes, travel in the same transport, pay the same fares. And that means not just having the right infrastructure, it means having the right people, the training for the staff to enable that access to become a reality. But I think there's another level. It's not enough, is what I'm arguing, to remove barriers. We also, in some cases, need to provide extra support. And this is not so much the case when you think about other areas of equality. In gender and ethnicity and sexuality, you remove the prejudice, people can get on with it, generally. But I think in disability, there's a particular emphasis on the need to provide that extra support. Because having an impairment costs more. You might need expensive equipment, like this wheelchair or the other wheelchairs you see. You may need a different form of vehicle. You may need a sign language interpreter to be with you. You may need personal assistance. It may be that you can't work to the same degree as other people. Maybe you can't work at all. Or maybe you can only work part-time. Disabled people are far more likely to work part-time than non-disabled people. And that's not just because of discrimination. It's to do with exhaustion. It's to do with physical and mental limitations. And some disabled people can't work at all. So what I'm trying to say is that if you just remove the barriers, you have formal equality, but unless you provide the extra support, disabled people are still going to have bad outcomes. And so the disability movement says, remove barriers, we'll be able to participate. I'm saying don't forget that we need to provide additional support for some disabled people in order that they flourish. And I don't want to call this charity, I want to call this solidarity. This is the solidarity which in a welfare state a progressive society, an inclusive society, we provide for all of our citizens and all of the people who come to live in our country. Solidarity so that nobody is left behind. And I think we can't forget that. These sorts of investments are sometimes cheaper, sometimes not, but they're one-off often. You build an accessible building, it doesn't tend to cost much more money. In fact, the amount that it costs to build an accessible building is less than 1% of the total build costs. There's no reason, no excuse for not doing it. These costs tend to be a bit more expensive and they tend to recur. They're not once for all. And I think that if we don't remember these claim rights, then we're going to have people left behind. Sorry, I didn't realise I'd done that. I said that, but I haven't clicked that. Because what I'm worried about is that at the moment we have inequality between disabled people and non-disabled people. And I think that unless we're careful, in the future, we have such an optimism about the CRPD. When you hear people's excitement and enthusiasm about the CRPD, it's a transformative moment. It's a wonderful moment in the history of the world that we have this convention which lays out what we wish to achieve. But I want us to realize that hope, realize that promise, and not in 10 years' time to be looking around and going, well, what difference did it make? We're still where we started from. Because I think that there will be increasing inequality if we're not careful. Not just between disabled people and non-disabled people, but between those disabled people who can benefit from barrier removal alone and those who need extra support to flourish. So, folks like me, I went to a good university, I've got a good brain, my physical needs are comparatively few. You give me a level access, I'll do any job in the land within reason. Actually, I'm not good enough to do every job in the land. I'll do a lot more. I'll do a lot more jobs. But there are lots of folks for whom that's not the case. And it's them that I am concerned about. And please forgive me, Michael, I want to give you two examples of places where formal equality has not done enough to raise the living standards of people with disabilities. Because if you go to the United States of America, it is a wonderful place to go to in terms of access. Barriers are removed. There is a civil rights tradition, there's formal equality. It's extraordinary. And of course, America led the way with the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. But if you look at the living conditions of disabled people remain poor, they remain unemployed, they have all sorts of problems with health costs, and many people live in nursing homes and don't live in the community. Now, I think, obviously, America is a particular place which lacks the strong welfare state that you and even Britain still has. But it shows the dangers of relying solely on formal equality. It's not going to enable people to flourish on its own. And the second example is the United Kingdom. Now, in Britain, we were slower than the United States, but we got there in the end. We had the 1995 and 2005 Disability Discrimination Act, the Equalities Act in 2010. We have removed a lot of environmental barriers. If I go into London, I can get on any bus in London. There's a ramp, the driver is trained, almost always the ramp works, almost always the driver does the right thing. Not always. I can get on a train, I can get in any public building. It's wonderful in that regard. We also have had a strong welfare state. I don't have to pay for my healthcare costs. I don't have to pay for my wheelchair. I don't have to pay for my rehabilitation. I have it assessed in terms of my needs, and I get the personal assistance I need to flourish. So all of those things are very good. But what we've had more recently, and we also had a move towards inclusive education. And I think that maybe 5 years ago, I want to say that the UK was the best place in the world to be disabled. Not least because we don't have the ice and snow and mountains that you have. But I think since then we've had the economic crisis, and we have a government with a welfare reform agenda which has cut back all of those supportive initiatives. So we had the disability living allowance, which was meant to meet the extra costs of being disabled. And that's been more tightly controlled, and the eligibility and the generosity of that has been cut back. And tens of thousands of people who got support to have their own vehicles for personal mobility are losing their vehicles. We had incapacity benefit for people who did not work, could not work, and that has been pushed back, and employment support allowance. And now people are really, really strictly controlled, and they are put under immense pressure to try and work, even if they're dying of cancer, even if they have profound impairments, which mean that it's almost impossible for them to work. And why is this? Well, that's a longer story. But one of the reasons is the government has said, and here's the minister, we're committed to the social model of disability. We're not going to go back to the medical model. And what they're saying, essentially, is, look, we've removed the barriers, we've made an equal, free society for you, so if you're not working, it's because you're a scrounger, and we're going to dock your benefits. Yeah? So they've taken the disability movement at their word, and they said, fine, we will remove the barriers, and then you have the responsibility to work. Now, for some people, that's fine. For me, that's fine. But for the person who has chronic fatigue, for the person who has an impairment which involves such pain and limitation that they cannot work an 8-hour day or a 40-hour week, they are put under severe pressure. Because, and if you look in the UK, Pat's Petition, Carer Watch are complaining, and they're saying that for some disabled people, a level playing field is not enough. We need to protect vulnerable people who need extra support in order to lead a quality of life. We cannot assume that if you're not working, it's because you're a scrounger. Some people just won't be able to work. So there's a real danger in thinking that all we need to do is to create a level playing field, and then disabled people will be fine because they're just like women, and minority ethnic communities and gay people get off their backs, they'll compete like everybody else. Disability is different from those other forms of inequality. So I just want briefly to talk about some of those substantive rights. And this is very selective. There are 50 articles in the CRPD. So accessibility. I mean, here this is about removing barriers. It's about, as the State Secretary said, reasonable accommodation, universal design, building a world that can be inclusive of everybody. And as I said previously, it's cheaper to do this from the start. It's essential to have strong accessibility legislation. I really welcome what the State Secretary said about ICT. We mustn't let disabled people be left behind in the knowledge economy. It's so important for people who often can't do physical work to be able to use their minds and communicate and participate. And the internet is potentially so liberating for disabled people. It doesn't matter if you have a visual impairment, a hearing impairment. It doesn't matter if you have autism and find it difficult to relate to people face to face. You can be equalized by ICT if it is accessible to you. So this is really important, and I'm really glad to see it right. The other point that I made earlier that I want to reiterate here is about the aging society. We are living longer than ever before. Our last years will be frail, and that's why it's so important that our buildings, our provision is accessible so that older people can participate side by side with younger people. So this is a cost-effective, timely intervention that we must get right now. Incidentally, one thing I do not understand about Norway, thresholds. I don't know if this is because of snow. I don't anticipate snow in my hotel room. But your architects seem to have it in mind that there must be a threshold in the entrance to every doorway. Every doorway. Why is that? Because for a wheelchair user, I find that really hard. And I'm sure that older people are stumbling and falling over them. So maybe the ministry could outlaw thresholds. That would be a good thing. Living independently and being included. I'm so glad. I think I heard the State Secretary talk about strengthening the right to personal assistance. This is so important. This liberates people with extra needs. And this does involve extra investment in order to enable people to participate. Not just to get out of bed in the morning, not just to have a meal, but to go to work, to go to school, to go to a political meeting, to go to church, to go to the theatre, to do what everybody else does. And so basic personal assistance is about equalising. But we need more than basic. We need to invest in people's flourishing as human beings. Because to be human is not simply to get up in the morning. It's not simply to eat a meal at night. It's to take part in the civic conversation, politically, culturally, socially. And we use this word independent living such a lot. And I think this can be misleading. Nobody wants to be independent apart from a teenager. We want to be connected. We want to have interdependence. We want not just to live isolated lives in the community, but to be part of the community, to have things to do with other people. And for people, for example, with intellectual disability, who leave an institution, it's not enough. You can be segregated in the community just as easily as you are in an institution. We need to build networks, invest in connections. We live in an era where we are very individualist. Our family lives far away. We travel to different places for university, for work. And so the connections between people are less strong. So that's why I think local and national government and the voluntary sector and the disability movement need to bring people together. Because so many disabled people have no friends. People with mental health problems, people with intellectual disability, older disabled people are living lives in our community isolated and friendless. And in a modern world, that's a tragic, tragic state of affairs that we have let happen. And so we need, through this convention, through this article, because it's not just about living independently, it's about being included in the community. It's about participation, not solitude. Education. Now, I've read with some dismay articles about Norwegian education. I know that you have rights to inclusive education, but there is segregation in the mainstream as well as in separate provision. That there are patterns of segregation re-emerging, where maybe you're all in the same class, but the disabled kids are taught by the special needs teacher, not by the mainstream teacher. Or where you're all in the same school, but you eat your lunch at a different table, or you do a different break time activity. And so I think this need for inclusion is a continuing effort. It's very hard to achieve, but it's so important. Not just because it has better outcomes for disabled kids, but also because it promotes understanding among non-disabled kids. And remember, these boys and girls are going to live in the same community. So we need the non-disabled people to be looking out for the disabled kids who they went to school with. And if they go to separate schools, or they never talk to each other, then we are losing out on something really important. And that applies not just to primary and secondary, but into tertiary education, high school, technical school, university. Because this is the way we build not just better citizens, but a more inclusive society all the way up. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of quotations about what we mean by inclusive education. It's not just the setting. It's not just about sitting back and saying, but it's fine, we have in Norway good mainstream provision for all. It's about what you do within the setting. That last quotation, a framework within which all children, regardless of ability, gender, language, ethnic or cultural origin, can be valued equally, treated with respect, and provided with real opportunities at school. Since I first came to Oslo in 2002, October 2002, Norway has become a very much more diverse society. So I think what we're talking about here is not just disability. It's about ethnicity, it's about religion, it's about different origins. It's about ensuring that everybody understands each other and includes each other. Article 25 on health. Now, I think this is particularly important because people with disabilities are disabled by society, we know that, but they also have usually a health condition which sometimes needs particular attention. They also have ordinary health needs. Michael talked about sexual and reproductive health. But it's also the case that disabled people have all the same issues as everybody else. They're at risk of diabetes now. They're at risk of heart disease. And they're at risk of HIV. The danger is where physicians only see the disability, not the person. They don't see that disabled people need to have the flu jab like everybody else. That they need to have breast cancer screening like everybody else. Yeah? So it's really important to understand the general health needs of disabled people. But disabled people are also vulnerable to secondary conditions that consequent on, for example, being a wheelchair user. I looked in the mirror last night and thought, my God, you're getting fat. And that's because I don't take enough exercise, and I'm at risk of cardiovascular disease because I'm a wheelchair user. So I need to make efforts there, and my health provider needs to make efforts there. And the same goes for people with intellectual disability. And we know that people with mental health conditions have extra health needs around diabetes. And in Britain, there's been some really strong work looking at the failure of the National Health Service to meet the needs of people with intellectual disability and mental health problems, who die younger, who have higher levels of illness and morbidity. Not because of their primary condition, but because of the way they're treated, the way their lifestyle is. And we need to target attention to ensure that disabled people don't do worse. And wait, the last point is important too. Even in Norway, I'm sure, people with disabilities experience discrimination and prejudice in the healthcare system. At the World Health Organization, we did the World Health Survey, we looked at disabled people's experiences. We found that they were twice as likely to find healthcare provider skills or equipment inadequate to meet their needs. They were 3 times as likely to be denied care. They were 4 times as likely to be treated badly. So this is people with disabilities who do still have general health needs as well as specific health needs being failed by the healthcare system. And we found similar things in the UK. So I'm sure there are similar things in Norway. And we need to do better at making sure the health system is inclusive. And we also need not just to remove barriers, but to target support for people, particularly with intellectual disability. Now, I'm running out of time, so I'll just say a few things about the next couple of slides. If we are serious about enabling people to work, we need to support them. We need to pay the extra costs, travel to work, equipment at work. I was very glad to hear the State Secretary talk about meeting some of those extra costs. And I think that we need people to be supported in work, not supported in a sheltered, separate workshop. And we need people to try out work. When a disabled person tries out work, their confidence increases. But even more importantly, the employer confidence increases. Because employers think disabled people are a cost. And they need to discover that we're a benefit. We work hard, we are loyal, we stick in the job, we're scared of losing that job, so we do even better than non-disabled people. But you'll never find that out if you don't give us a chance. In terms of adequate standard living and social protection, we need to have a welfare system which is flexible enough that people are able to have their extra costs met. That if they're working part-time, they're not left in poverty. And that if they have to leave work, it doesn't mean, for example, for early retirement, that it doesn't mean that their quality of life suffers. And this is the big challenge of our times. Assessment processes which are transparent, legitimate, non-stigmatizing. We have failed that test in the UK, and I hope you're doing better here. So, what I've tried to say, that we need to do more than just remove barriers. We need to provide extra investment and support to promote flourishing. If we invest more, we'll get more back. We'll get more back because disabled people will be able to do more. And we'll get more back because we have a society where everybody flourishes and we can truly attain our aspirations. And when we are monitoring the CRPD, because now you've ratified, you need to monitor it. You need to see how you're doing. You need to monitor its impact on all disabled people. We do not want a situation where some disabled people are flourishing, but others are being left behind. We need to understand that disabled people are different, that our needs are different. We all have the same human rights, disabled and non-disabled, and different sorts of disabled people. As Michael said, we have the same fundamental, universal human rights. But we need maybe to treat different people differently to enable them to achieve those fundamental rights and to lead a good quality of life. Thank you very much.